share. Those are words, can you turn it into math?
Per.
Yeah. Dividends.
Look at you.
Divided by shares equals dividends per share. You know dividends per share tells us 1.08. We now know how many shares there are, and I'm not gonna write that down, but we know how many shares there are, then we can just solve for dividends. Make sense to everybody? Does that make sense? So we got 1 million, we all argued about this. I had it up on Excel spreadsheet. Yeah. So there's 900 and something, blah, 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 blah. But, okay, so next question, after you know that, could you figure out how many retained earnings they had?
Yes. Net income.
Yeah. So, did you guys get dividends? How much are dividends? I'm gonna do. Okay, I'm bringing you into the circle of trust.
We have the same number.
Both of you are welcome in. Alright, 206 million even?
There's like more numbers, but.
Sam.
Numbers in a straight line.
127,000.
So 206, 127.
127,400.
Alright, so that's how many shares, that's how much that's the total amount of dividends that were paid out. If you own one share of this company, you got $1.08. Does that make sense? If you own 100 shares, what would your dividends be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
You got some money.
Not a yes and no question.
At least she was engaging.
Yeah. Well, if you owned 100 shares, how many dividends would you get?
Yeah, you gotta.
Because people, this is a big deal to get the dividends.
Like
108.
Yeah.
108,
Yeah.
$108. For 200,000. 108,000. Yeah, that would be awesome. 1,008. Got it. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so let's see. Now that you know dividends, and you also know the net income, can you figure out how much was retained? Yeah, so net income, wait a minute. I'm seeing something really bad here.
Net income is like super low.
It's not that bad. 689 million is your net income, should equal 206, 127, 423.80 plus retained earnings. So retained earnings are gonna be equal to 689, 123 minus 206, 127, 423.80. How much? $400 and some thousand dollars in change. That make sense to everyone? Look what all we learned. Yes?
So that big dividend number, the 206 is 1.9858 times the dividend per share, is that correct?
Yes. So, here's the equation right here, and I will put blah, blah, blah in there. Let me tell you what blah, blah, blah is. No, I can't tell you. It's what was it, 1,900,000 shares? So dividends are gonna be 1.08 times whatever that thing I did in Excel was, 1,900,000 some odd shares. You know, it's the number that, the circle of trust kicked everybody out of.
Gotcha.
Got it?
Those of us that did the same thing.
But you didn't come in. Alright, so,
It's very simplified income statement, does non-operating expenses and revenues from other things come into play? Is it
it's an income statement.
included in the top, like in
Yeah.
general revenues, general
Yeah.
expenses?
Exactly.
So if it was a detailed one, if it would be after all expenses, all revenues,
Right.
except for interest and tax.
IBIT, so when you're talking about IBIT, everything above IBIT is everything but interest and tax. Everything but, so you can have lots of different lines of expenses, and we can be calling them all the different kinds of stuff. Lots of different kinds of lines of expenses that come up above. So that earnings before, and this is important, before the interest and before the tax. Yep. That makes sense to everybody? All right. All right, so that was just a little warm up. All right, for algebra, you're going to have more and more algebra. In other words, you're gonna have things missing and you have to deduce from what you have to figure it out, answers out. And so the better, everybody's had algebra, right? I know it's a requirement. I know it's a requirement, but I do also know that some people avoid taking the math classes till their senior year. Yeah, so hopefully everybody's had it, right? Okay, so I'm gonna fast forward to ratio analysis. We left class, I think the last time, talking about the different categories of ratios that we're gonna talk about. There are 5. We're gonna start off with the liquidity ratios, which we'll call the short-term solvency. That's basically, can we get our bills paid short-term enough to stay in business? All right, are we liquid enough to get our bills paid? Because if you can't pay your bills, you can't pay your obligations, you're going to have, particularly creditors, put pressure on you to take you to bankruptcy court. Does that make sense to everybody? So you've got to be able to make those short-term kind of liquidity issues have to be managed. Then we're going to talk about more long-term solvency, which is everything to do with leverage, everything to do with debt, long-term debt. Then we're going to talk about asset management, which are a lot of turnover ratios. And this is really going to be about generation of income from basically our money makers. Our money makers are our assets, and it's how much change we're shaking out of those assets. In other words, those assets are supposed to be producing revenues for us. How efficient are they producing revenues for us? It's about efficiencies. So it's all about revenue production. And then profitability ratios, we're gonna talk a bunch of them. But the bottom line, things like profit margin, I know that it seems like, particularly when you come out of an econ class, profit is revenues minus expenses. So it's got 2 sides to it. And that you're maximizing the revenues while minimizing the cost, and that's gonna maximize your profits. But I'm gonna show you a little math that profit margins really aren't about both revenue generation and cost mitigation. It's really cost mitigation. I'll show you some algebra, and the profit margins are telling you what's driving your cost reduction. So asset management has to do with producing income. Profitability ratios have a lot to do with mitigation of cost, reducing cost. Then we have a last set of ratios or market value ratios that we will only be able to do on publicly traded companies. And that is because they're the ones that have a stock price ticking away, and we need the stock price to do these ratios. So, in essence, companies like Community Coffee, which is privately held, we can't really legitimately do any kind of market ratios on them. Now, I will show you some methods in which we can use with comparables on Community Coffee to kind of back out what the market value for Community Coffee should be. But since they're not publicly traded, we can't see a stock price in the market. That makes sense to everybody? So we can't do a legit market ratio analysis on it. All right, so the very first thing, so I'm gonna erase all these numbers and get rid of this section first, because this is what really broke our circle of trust today, right here. Feels like a bad karma right here in this square. I'm gonna stay away from this part of the board, okay, just because there's bad karma there. And the rest of it I'll do. All right, so liquidity ratios, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. And we're gonna talk about what do they mean. As we go through each one of these ratios, we're gonna talk about one, how you calculate it, which is easy. That's what the test is gonna be, honestly. Just gonna be plug and chug into these equations. The equations are given to you on a cheat sheet. I literally think if I took that cheat sheet and the test and took it out into the, parking lot, someone could do it, right? Someone who like, oh, well, let's put 2 and 2 together. I could figure it out, all right? So it's not hard stuff. So let's go through it first, calculate the ratio. Then second, what I'm here for is to give you some intuition about what does a ratio mean. And then I'm going to give you intuition about, do we want to max this thing out, or do we want to push this thing to 0? What's this range of normal, and how should we judge that? Because it becomes pretty subjective. It's not something that's real objective. Sometimes it's not right or wrong. It's relative to something. All right, so we're going to talk about that intuition and try to get at what is this ratio trying to tell us. Alright, so what is it trying to tell us, and which one of these should we use? Should we use them all at once, or do we need to think about this? Alright, so there's 2 kinds of ratio analysis. One is what we call time series, and the other is called cross-sectional. And you heard those terms before?
Yes, we did a lot of studies.
Okay, so time series means we're going to analyze these ratios for one company over time. So we're going to get a series of, let's say, Chesapeake's liquidity from 2005, when I bought them, all the way to the current earnings, which is this is the second quarter. This is first quarter 2018. Wow, time flies. I've owned that shit for 13 years. Holy cow, I'm so bullheaded. So bullheaded.